is important to be equipped with the relevant and sufficient information so that the decision can be made confidently. PropertyGuru seeks to simplify this process for property seekers, including first-time home buyers and existing homeowners who might be looking at buying their second or subsequent properties. So we created, for example, the Property Market Index report to help property seekers understand the movement of the property market better, enabling them to gain greater insights on current price trends that are in line with market sentiments and to try to time their purchases better. In this Property Market Index second quarter 2020, we will share the link at the end of the webinar for you to access the report. We look at pricing and supply indices of private residential properties in Singapore. Various locations we have taken into consideration and across different property types to provide a comprehensive overview of property market dynamics across the city-state. Using a range of statistical techniques, the data from over 200,000 private home listings on PropertyGuru Singapore are aggregated and indexed, demonstrating the movement of supply-side pricing. The PropertyGuru Singapore Property Market Index shows seller optimism and indicates the price level that developers and homeowners feel they can fetch for their respective properties. An increase in the Property Market Index may demonstrate buoyancy of sentiment, while a decrease may indicate a moderation of expectations. The index is based on price levels as of the first quarter 2015. This means that aggregated price levels are denominated as 100 at the first quarter of 2015, and the subsequent quarters' pricing are relative to that. We complement the price levels with a view on supply volumes in the market through the number of property listings on PropertyGuru Singapore. Our supply volumes not only take into account residential resale supply, but also new launch supply by developers in Singapore. So once again, welcome to our webinar on the Singapore property market in 2020, buy, sell, or wait. With me in the Zoom studio are two distinguished guests who will help us make sense of the current property market situation in the light of COVID-19. With me are Dr. Nai Jia, Deputy Director of the Institute of Real Estate and Urban Studies, National University of Singapore, and Mr. Winston Lee, Director of Special Projects, PropertyGuru, and a savvy property investor himself. So this evening, we will kick off this webinar by sharing with you the following. And let me get to the agenda. We will share with you key findings from PropertyGuru's Property Market Index report for the second quarter 2020, and I shall do that. Then I will call upon my colleague Winston. We call him affectionately Win, W-I-N. That's a good name to have in times like this, isn't it? To shed light on how real estate trends from Singapore's last recession could inform property predictions in 2020. And of course, Dr. Lee on V-shape, U-shape, and L-shaped property trends. And I'd like you to know that this is not a lesson on bodybuilding, just to be sure. After Dr. Lee's presentation, we will have a time for you to pose questions to the panelists. We will attempt our best to answer your questions by the end of the webinar. However, we seek your understanding if we are unable to do so. Our team will reach out to you after the webinar with a response to your questions nonetheless. So let me begin. Whilst it may be hard to believe in this current landscape, 2020 actually started on a very bright note for the Singapore market, with interest rates back to new lows after 3 rate cuts by the US Federal Reserve, and an exuberant 2019 market that witnessed close to 10,000 new home sales amidst low unemployment rate property market watchers were expecting 2020 to be a year of clear skies and sunny days. Unexpectedly, the Black Swan event, COVID-19, surprised the world and soon began to spread globally. By early February, the first locally transmitted cases emerged on our Singapore shores. Within a month or so thereafter, market sentiments and all previous market forecasts turned on their heads with an ongoing surge in infection, and government measures such as safe distancing and subsequently the circuit breaker were promptly put in place. The PropertyGuru Singapore Property Price Index fell marginally by 1% to 109.56 points quarter on quarter, as you can see from the slide. That's the red line in the graph marked Property Market Index. Now, this corroborates with the URA Price Index for private non-landed homes, executive condominiums excluded, which recorded a 1% decline in the same quarter due to lower consumer confidence on the back of weakened GDP forecasts for the year. Districts in the core central region appear to be leading the price correction, a trend that was observed in past crises. On the other hand, districts in the outside central region have remained resilient mostly and bucked the trend in certain cases. The limited impact on property prices as at end March 2020 can be attributed to sound fundamentals and the quiet confidence across the general population on how the Singapore government is managing the COVID-19 situation. Developers are generally holding firm on asking prices at this early stage. They are mostly well capitalized and have sufficient runway to observe the market situation before their 5-year time frame to sell off all inventory is up. At this time, the broader market has also not felt the brunt of economic impact as government stimulus packages help stem the bleeding at all levels of society. However, despite the stimulus, money velocity remains low, and we are likely to witness sharper corrections in this quarter as certain gaps in the marketplace cannot be filled by rescue packages. The PropertyGuru Singapore Property Supply Index, that's the yellow line on the graph, which tracks the number of non-landed private residential listings posted on PropertyGuru, recorded a spike of 41.6% from 136.2 percentage points in Q4 2019 to 192.9 points in the first quarter of 2020. Now, this demonstrates a significant increase of residential listings, meaning more owners are more willing than before to sell their properties. Meanwhile, URA statistics in the first quarter of 2020 indicated a 5.4% vacancy rate of completed private residential units. Resale and subsale units newly placed on the market are the main contributors to the growth of listings in the past quarter. Let me go on to share with you the top 5 districts where we see asking price growth in the first quarter of 2020, and also the top 5 districts where we see asking price moderation. Now, as the impact of COVID-19 hit the market harder only in March, these are some overarching reasons why certain districts fared better while others lagged behind in the last quarter. So looking at the top 5 districts, that's those on the left, with asking price growth in the first quarter of 2020, the asking median price per square foot growth ranged from 1.25% to 6.41% for districts 13, I'm reading from the bottom up, 17, 12, 27, and 22. And right on the top, 22, leading the price growth in the asking price is Jurong Boon Lay. Now, you may be wondering why Jurong Boon Lay, District 22, topped the charts in asking price growth. It's not because I've got friends there. Or even Yishun Sembawang, District 27 for that matter. The top 5 districts share a commonality of low listing count, despite some of the estates like Jurong, Sembawang, Yishun, being very large towns and having a large annual share of upgraders. Now, the recent lack of new launches in Jurong also means private resale owners there have been getting more buyer interest and have bargaining power. For example, in the first quarter of 2020, Jurong has 2,241 listings. Yishun Sembawang had 2,752 listings. Now contrast this with Hillview, which has 6,352 listings, and Orchard River Valley, District 9, which has more than 7,600 listings. Now that explains why Districts 9 and 23, for example, are among the top districts seeing price moderation. Now that brings me to the next chart of the top 5 districts for asking price moderation. That's on your right, and that's the one in yellow, right? The top 5 districts. It ranged from 2.13%, again reading from the bottom, to 12.36% for the following 5 districts. You have District 2, followed by 9, 23, 26, and right at the top, District 7, the Bugis Rochor area. Now, in the 5 districts with asking price moderation, both Hillview, Bukit Panjang, and Orchard River Valley have more supply of residential listings put up for sale, as I mentioned before. So it is possible that the ample choices available in these locations have prompted sellers to be more open to price negotiation. For the Bugis Rochor district, the M was launched and over 370 units were sold at lower prices than she would have sold in normal times, thereby averaging prices lower in that district. Some neighborhoods like Upper Thomson, Mandai are outliers with traditionally very low listing count at 200 plus per quarter. So the drop then may not be attributable easily to the same reasons. We'll have to deep dive into an analysis, but that's not covered in this property market index report. That said, it is possible to highlight that as listings count are low and similarly transaction volumes, any outlier transaction, for example, huge terraces or balcony types with very low per square foot prices, could have a larger impact on the district average prices. Once again, what I've shared with you is an excerpt of the Property Market Index Report, second quarter 2020. You will have the link to the full report at the end of the webinar, and I commend the report to your reading pleasure. Now, next I will ask my colleague, Winston, to shed light on how real estate trends from Singapore's last recession could inform us on property predictions in 2020. Win, over to you.
Thank you, DK. Next slide, please. Right. So I think there are 3 key points I want to share with my friends here about the property market. The first key point is that property market in Singapore, as with everywhere else in the world, operate based on property cycle. So when we say property cycle, what it means is that whenever there's an upturn, there will be a downturn. And when there's a downturn, it will also be followed by an upturn. So from an investor point of view, I think it's very important for us. Can you go back?
Yeah, sorry.
It's very important for us to understand where we are at the cycle so that we can make the right decision pertaining to today's topic, whether to buy, hold, or sell. Commonly, most investors make, the most common mistake investors make is they sell during a downturn and they buy during an upturn. or they buy during upturn and they cannot hold and they sell during a downturn. That is where people lose money in property investment. Or another group of investor is they didn't do anything during a downturn and they missed the opportunity to cash in on a good profit. So how do we look at the property cycle? In Singapore, because by and large, our market is very stable, I would say that our cycle probably operate on every 10 years basis. Meaning to say, the last major downturn we had for Singapore is probably during the global financial crisis, which is what some people call the Lehman crisis that is caused by the collapse of the American banks. So if you notice here over the chart, the second thing I want to highlight is whenever there's a crisis, definitely the property prices and the transaction volume will be affected. And from here, it's very obvious that when the crisis strikes Singapore, together with the rest of the world economy, starting in Q3 2008, we see a drop in terms of the prices. And just to share with you, from the data I have collated, in the last global financial crisis, we had a drop on average of about 25% of the property prices. As compared to the earlier crisis, which is the Asian financial crisis, the drop was about 45%. But having said that, the good news is that we are not experiencing this kind of drop in this current COVID-19 outbreak. What we have here is, that's what Tee Khoon has pointed out. Our Q1 drop is only a 1% drop in terms of prices. Many analysts think that the overall drop in prices for the year 2020, depending on whether they are the pessimistic or the optimistic, the range of prediction can range from between 3 to 10%. So for those of you who were hoping for a 25% drop in prices like the last global financial crisis, that is unlikely going to happen. The other thing to note is that even for transaction volume, we didn't do as badly as the last global financial crisis. In the month of April, where we had this lockdown in Singapore, we still managed to do about 263 units transaction of new homes as of the last week of April, where we think that we'll close the month of April around less than 300. But that is still not as bad as during the trough in the global financial crisis, when we were doing transaction volume of just between 100 to 200 units a month. And the last thing I want to point out, the difference or the similarity between these two downturns is that we notice whenever there's a downturn, when the market bounce back, there will always be a new high which is higher than the peak of the last peak, which means that for investors who have taken the calculated decision to enter the market during a downturn, usually they will benefit not only from the market bounce back, but they will also benefit from a new peak that is being created. So these are the three key points I want to make for this chart. Next slide, please. Thanks, Tee Khoon. And some people may want to ask, what district bounce back more compared to the others? So this is some data we have gotten from the last global financial crisis. So I think I will segregate this into three parts. The first part is what we call the core central region, which is highlighted in District 1 and District 9. Normally, in a crisis, core central region is the one that dropped the most. But when there's an upturn or bounce back, core central region is also the district that will rise the most. So it's quite intuitive that this pattern play out in the last global financial crisis, and it did play out in our current downturn caused by COVID-19 also. While we say that the overall average property prices dropped by 1%, the drop is not uniform. The core central region actually dropped more by 2.2% compared to OCR and RCR. whereas this rule dropped by between 0.4% to 0.5%. So what I want to say is then there will be more bargaining buy in the core central region during a downturn, and the upside will be higher during upturn based on the past pattern play out. Okay, I am done. So I would like to hand over to Nai Jia. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks Winston for sharing. Over to Nai Jia. Is it going to be V, U, or L shape? So Dr. Lee, we are all ears.
Nai Jia, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, Nai Jia, you're still muted. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, because the sentiments are muted. Yeah.
Good one.
So,
Good one.
jokes aside, I think when we look at this cycle, of course, this COVID-19, one of the key issues is after everything is settled, what will happen next? Will we see a V-shaped recovery, U-shape, or L-shape? Interestingly, Singapore actually experienced all these three shapes before, depending on the time frame. If we look at the V shape, we will look at, actually it's just now like what Winston was talking about, the global financial crisis. That is actually quite a V-shaped kind of recovery. And the reason for such V-shaped recovery is because you have certain growth clusters or certain countries that are growing extremely fast and that help to boost the growth. And in the case of Singapore, that is actually China. During that point in time, we see a lot of Chinese buyers coming in. China is growing very fast. Singapore is also experiencing a double-digit kind of economic growth. So we see a kind of V-shaped kind of rebound in prices quite fast. Now, when do we see a L shape? Now, L shape, if you think about it, it actually happens after 2001. That is after, of course, the 911, and then after that, things start to sort of like go on a very long period of stability. Now, during this point in time, that actually, if you look into it, there's a lot of events that's happening. One of the things is, of course, SARS. There's also some Gulf War, and all these issues sort of like accumulated and sort of also impacted on the market. Now, so when we look at L shape, it means one thing is that the whole overall economy, at that point in time, is also not very diversified. We all rely on US economy, very strongly correlated to US economy. Whereas by 2008, because of the emergence of China, the whole global economy become more diversified. So you see the recovery is much sharper in terms of that. Now, what about U-shape? When we look at U-shape kind of recovery, it's generally what it means, it takes a bit more time. And usually the underlying issues of the underlying reasons that impact on the markets actually drag for a very long time, and that actually created the U-shape. Actually, when we look at the market from after the government implemented the TDS, it's a very U-shaped kind of curve, because economic reasons why things are actually moving, but it's just that there's this ABSD that people are paying, everything, the TDSR. So that actually sort of curbed the demand. So the demand didn't really move as fast as it should be. So that's why you see it being a gradual U-shape. Now, the next question is, with this COVID-19, does that mean that it will become a V-shape? Because if you look at it, if you look at the UR's price index, it's still relatively at the top. And if it drop, if it come down to the previous low, which is during when the TDSR was implemented, what happened is that it's also about 10% drop in the price. So should people wait? Now, intuitively, it's very easy to say that, oh, let's buy low, sell high. That is like a standard pro forma. But the problem is when it's low, we don't see that happening in the past crisis. And one of the reasons is that when things are not doing well, a lot of people's income are affected. Then you'll see a lot of the good properties are actually not available. So when you look at the price index, one of the things is you see that the price came down. You may go to CCR to see, oh, the price have came down by 2 to 3%. But you realize that, hey, the prices, it's not that easy to find a good property or the property that one desires at that price range they find. So what happened is the sellers are also trying to protect their own interests, because generally people have this kind of loss aversion attitude. I buy at $1 million, I will not sell below $1 million. I can sell maybe a bit less than 1.2, going to $1.1 million. So it's that kind of mindset that they go into. So for those looking at these stress sales, unfortunately, I think given like what Tee Khoon has rightly pointed out with the resilience budgets and what MAS have put forth, I think we will see some of them coming up, but it's not so much because of COVID-19, but because of their business changes, structural changes that have caused some of them to have issues. Even we look at the recent case of Hin Leong, it's actually due to the oil price crisis, the different competing forces between Russia and Saudi Arabia that causes oil price to go down, and it's not really COVID-19. So the next question is, how far down can it go? I think at this point in time, the question of how far down can it go actually correlates very strongly to the number of active cases in Singapore and globally. If we find that the numbers are going down and that circuit breaker measures are slowly being removed, I think that the extent of going down may not be that much because capital is still relatively flushed in the market. So the question again comes to location, or timing. To be honest, it depends on whether you are buying for owner occupation or are you buying for investment. For those who are buying for investment, they are not only looking at this chart alone, they are also looking at the stock market charts. They are also looking at other property charts in other countries. So things like, whether they should exit now to buy stocks, that could be one thing that leads to the other. So you do see people are trying to sell off their properties because they find that other assets are more attractive. So those are more for investor motive. Now the question is this the right kind? And that is actually the million-dollar question. Now location. That is the interesting part, because when you look at this PropertyGuru report, it does tells you one thing, is that buying in certain areas, the supply in terms of not only new sales but the resale is very important, and that is one of the key things that one may want to consider when they look at location for investment. Yeah. So like this chart, yeah. So those are the things that I think people should take into account. Now the only interesting part is we only talk about the demand side of things when we look at sales and prices. But there's another part that is a bit unexplained, is actually supply of unsold homes. And this is what the new sales are. There are a lot of misunderstanding that all these unsold units first will impact on prices. The interesting part is the unsold units actually doesn't really move in tandem with home prices. In fact, the higher supply you have, the pricing seems to be moving better. And the reason is because of the lack nature of supply. And second thing is, if you look at supply, every time when there's a hike, the supply is always, the supply of unsold homes are usually very low, that actually lead to the hike in prices. So you can see that actually supply of unsold homes are actually coming down. And that is also one of the reasons why we are talking that, actually the market in 2020, it should not be that bad if there's no COVID-19. In fact, it should be like what Tee Khoon says, blue skies. But unfortunately, because of this Black Swan event, and this is what we are experiencing now. So yeah, so after this, yeah, so that's all for me. Tee Khoon, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Nai Jia, for sharing with us. And we go quickly to the question and answer segment of this particular webinar. So if you are a Zoom participant, you can submit your questions. Some of you have already done so via the Q&A button of the Zoom platform. And for those of us who are watching this seminar or webinar live from Facebook, please submit your questions via the comments section on Facebook live. I'm going to stop sharing the slides so that you can have a greater clarity of all our faces. All right. Yeah. And let's go off on our first question. All right. There are a few questions. I've actually aggregated them so that I will ask them at one shot because it surrounds the same subject matter. Would there be more fire sale as people lose jobs and unable to service mortgage debt? Will property prices fall as a result of COVID-19? So maybe I'll start this off, all right, and then fellow panelists can just chime in along the way. With respect to fire sale and whether people lose jobs and they are unable to service their mortgage loan. The hefty support from the resilience and solidarity budgets should help job retention, and also the announced loan relief measures by the Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS, for eligible individuals to defer their property loan payments up to the end of 2020 should indirectly help support current prices as property owners have more breathing space to navigate any cash flow difficulties. The property market will likely keep afloat for as long as the unemployment rate remains low and people are able to service their mortgages. So in my view, we are not expecting major price corrections in the coming months, as many property measures have already been put in place over the past years to ensure financial prudence among buyers. Win, you have a view to chime in?
So back to the chart I showed you guys, the property cycle chart that you guys saw just now. Remember I mentioned to you that this time round, the drop in prices that we see in Q1 is only 1%, which is a far cry compared to what we saw back in the global financial crisis, the last down cycle, which has a drop across the board on average of 25%. Why is there a difference in terms of the quantum of drop between now and then? So let me elaborate to you the difference. Today's Singapore property market is very different from back in 2007. Back in 2007, we were on a very high of euphoria from a very peak cycle. So it is actually ready for a correction, but the global financial crisis aggravated the correction. But today's market, we are having a Singapore residential market that was tempered by more than 7 rounds of cooling measures, including the last round, I think maybe 8 or 9 rounds of cooling measures, which include measures like seller stamp duty, which actually make it hard for any buyer to flip property. In my past few years of property investment, I have never come across any investor who tell me, hey, Winston, I managed to flip a property in Singapore. So that has eradicated flipping. Secondly, with TDSR, total debt servicing ratio, it's almost hard for anyone to leverage beyond 60% of his monthly income. Again, that put a break in terms of using debt financing. And with that, even if someone were to lose his job, for example, he probably will have enough finance or savings to weather him out throughout this period, including what Tee Khoon mentioned about the government support measure, so that he won't have to force sell his property. And third, additional buyer stamp duty. The ABSD is instrumental in tweaking the mindset of people entering the Singapore residential market ever since it was introduced. With ABSD, it's almost unthinkable for any short-term investor who say, hey, I want to enter the market now and I want to sell in 1 2 years later, because that's not going to happen. That's not going to even able to cover for his additional buyer stamp duty. As a result, for these past few years, the people who re-enter the market is either owner-occupier or long-term investor. This can also be highlighted in terms of the data. In fact, in the global financial crisis, 63% of the private residential owner, excluding landed property, are Singaporean. But today, talk about 2019 Q4, the total percentage of Singaporean owners of residential property, excluding landed, is 78%. So by and large, these Singaporean people, they are either owning their own home, which they won't sell, or they are long-term investor, because their long-term perspective towards investing in the Singapore property is shaped by the structure of the ABSD. So with that as a background, it's going to be, there won't be any bubble in today's market. So because there's no bubble, a crash is very unlikely to happen, almost impossible to happen.
So the possibility of many homeowners having to slash prices or defaulting on housing loans is thus not high. Most property owners would not be under a huge pressure to sell. And furthermore, like you pointed out, the majority of property sales over the last few years have been driven by local owner-occupiers and investors, savvy, careful investors, the majority of which are holding for the long term.
Yes, and also by virtue of the total debt servicing ratio, I think what this measure has created is also, it has self-select people who really have the financial power, then they can enter the market. Those who are really marginal or borderline, they won't be able to enter the market. In short, financially weak players will be hard to enter the market to begin with. So as a result, those who are in the market are really financially very resilient and strong.
Nigel, a quick view from you before we take on the next question. Yeah.
Okay. When we look at the auction sales, right, like mortgage sales, all those things, if those are the closest to what we call fire sales, for those properties that are foreclosed, the numbers are increasing, no doubt. But if we compare the number of mortgage sales at any point in time to like economic crisis, it's always a very small percentage. It's about 6% of the total transaction volume at most. But then over time, what we see at this point in time is it's not so much of this COVID-19. You will see a lot of distress sales, because the whole effect from unemployment increasing to the price effect, it took about 3 months to 6 months. Now, of course, the current situation, there are pay cuts and whatnot, that will come and impact on the different families and households. But that kind of impact, do we see immediately on prices? Unlikely. That is very highly unlikely. We probably have to wait 6 months later. Now, the thing is, by 6 months later, if the situation improves, then you see that suddenly the pickup will start to come back again. So the decline may not be there for you to see it. Now, alternatively is that if things really prolong, things structurally change, then there will be a distress sales. But interestingly, when there are distress, nobody there to buy anything that's from distress sales. The reason being is that if you see the property value drop by 50%, you have to ask yourself, will it drop some more? And that is the ongoing perception and behavior that we saw in the markets, the kind of herd instincts that are in there. So that's why, even though we talk about buy low, sell high, why most of the people still buy high, sell low? Because we are driven actually by very behavioral instincts. And when we see everybody going to buy, we go and buy. When everybody doesn't buy, we all become fearful and don't buy at all. So that is the kind of psychology that is. That's why I think at this point in time, for buyers that are looking for distressed sales, they are likely to be disappointed at this point.
I think this question might be meant for you, but I'm going to aggregate 3 questions together because it's again on the same subject matter, so that we can get some momentum in our answering questions. What is the rental market outlook? Wow, this is a big question, isn't it? Is it wise to invest in a property for investment purposes, meaning for rental? right? If so, which locations would have better rental yield?
Yeah.
I think there was a spike in rental transactions
Sure.
at the close of last quarter
Correct.
from a report that I've read, and I suspected that it could be due to the fact that by March, COVID-19 has already emerged on our shores, and many tenants would have chosen to renew leases at their current premises rather than to go on a property hunt for new rental premises. It's not only safer, but landlords would have done their fair bit to incentivize their tenants so that they can continue to stay and they will have their rental income protected. So, but going forward, what will be the view? Nai Jia, you want to start first, and then Win, you can come in.
Yeah. Actually, it's very interesting. The rental market has been improving in 2019. And actually in 2020, the rents are supposed to improve further. And one of the key reasons is that there are not many new completions in the market. And so that actually helped to, support the rents. And of course, this COVID-19, because we only see the first quarter, what happened is that a lot of tenants are also afraid. They realize that this is the issue, they quickly lock in. And then at the same time, the supply of units being available also dropped, because what happened is the landlords are also worried, should I rent it out now? What if the person has, COVID-19 and whatnot? So suddenly supply side you don't have, and demand side, you realize you still need to have a place, especially, there's travel restrictions and you're stuck in Singapore. Yeah, you have this demand there, and you have to pay the rents. Now, the only question is what happens next, right? What happens next is very interesting, because if the market starts to recover, things starts to improve, that there's a labor shortage in a lot of sectors because they have to pick up that demand. And so again, you will see there will be a sudden influx of workers from the safe areas if possible. And then if those are not available, then of course the supply will be limited in that sense. But then again, people's perception of whether they should rent out again is also worrying. So they also may be concerned. So in terms of the availability of new listings will be fewer. At the same time, the number of people that is coming in, but they are still willing to pay because of the jobs, I think there will still be demand there. So I think overall, the rental market, I would say, it still looks promising, especially now you see that new completions are likely to be delayed because of all the construction being stopped.
Okay, for me, I would like to tackle the second part of the question. Which location will have a better rental yield from an investor point of view? So I always like to tackle this kind of question by responding to the audience that for me, I treat property investment like a business. So when I look at rental returns, effectively, I'm looking at from a business point of view, where can I find tenants? And instead of us asking where there's a better rental yield, when I bought during a downturn back in 10 years back, I would rephrase the question, where can I get a stable rental yield? Because to me, a stable rental yield is even more important than a better rental yield. Why I say that is because in a downturn, there could be people out of job. I think data have shown that there could be 100,000 retrenchment in this year. May or may not happen, but it could be around that range. So in any property cycle, it coincides with economic cycle. And economic cycle also coincides with employment cycle. So in a downturn, there will be people out of job, and there will be people who may not be able to afford paying you rent because they are out of job. Henceforth, when I choose the property, I think ahead to look at who will be my tenant. That means who are my customers. So in this aspect, I would choose a location that resilient. What do I mean by resilient? Resilient means this kind of customer, whether in an upturn or downturn, they will not go away. I give a more specific example. Those properties that I accumulated during the global financial crisis is walking distance to NUS. and Nai Jia is working. Is working Science Park. So I must say that Nai Jia has found himself a very good job. I must say that in places like NUS, Academic, NTU, Science Park, where these are the employers where whether it's upturn, downturn, global financial crisis, Asian financial crisis, COVID-19 crisis, any form of crisis, they will not retrench because they still need lecturers, they still need researchers, they still need scientists, they maybe even need more new scientists to do research on the new drugs to solve the virus. So that is what I meant by resilient. So the other factor of resilient is more towards MRT station. So in my past experience, if I have two property A and B, the property that is walking distance, I have one that is 8 steps away from the MRT station, another one that is 8 minutes away from the MRT station. The one that is 8 steps away tend to be rented out much faster, command better returns compared to the one that is 8 minutes to the MRT station. And the one that is walking distance to NUS, to Science Park, I must say, throughout the whole 10 years of tenancy, I never have a single day of downtime, meaning to say there's back-to-back rental. And I can have a tenant, someone as smart as Nai Jia, who can rent the place renewal for 4 times over 8 years, because all these are very stable. So therefore, my advice to the audience is that when we think about buying property for rental returns during a downturn, don't think about better rental return. Think about stability, because you have 12 months of stable rental is better than you have 10 months of downtime. Even though your last 2 months could be very high, it's not even enough to cover for your installment.
So what do you think about renting, or rather investing in a location such as the core central region? After all, the asking price corrections are in that district because of more residential listings that have been put on the market for sale. And I think there's quite a bit of stability there, right, in terms of rental, because it's a prime district, isn't it? I mean, just tapping your views, because that's a real question that came in on CCR.
Okay, so if you ask me, I think it's a very tricky question. I think, bro, so if you ask me, if I today were to invest in core central region, to me, it's more of a capital gain play than a rental play, to be frank.
Right.
Because as I mentioned, as with the past downturn, the global financial crisis or the Asian financial crisis, and also this downturn, core central region fall the most, and you can capitalize on a higher upside during upturn. That's where the capital gain comes into the picture. And then when you compare our core central region with the core central region in all the other gateway cities across the world, whether it's London or Hong Kong or New York, ours is considered the most reasonably priced. So that's where the capital gain value comes into the picture for core central region. I would hesitate to say that it's a rental game play, because as I mentioned, now in a downturn, stability outweighs high returns. Stability is more important. Why I say core central region may not be the most stable is because in any economic down cycle, especially those that are related to financial cycle, many of the retrenchment actually take place in CBD because we have all these financial sector and all this. So all these sectors that are taking place in CBD, your core central region are serving this group of customer. So I would say this group of customer that is being served by core central region, probably they will be more subjected to the downturn and the upcycle. So I would say the stability definitely is not as good as compared to you serve someone like Nai Jia, who is working in NUS or Science Park. But that's from a stability point of view. But of course, when the economy bounce back and all these big companies, financial institutions go on hiring spree, and then they give many months of bonus, oil and gas come back again, of course, I think your rental return will become, I wouldn't call that to be stable.
So Nai Jia, what do you think?
So if we think about rents, right? Of course, just now Win really bring out the good point about being stable, and then whether this is volatile. I think the key thing here is that when you look at rental, a very important thing is what is the labor cluster? Who are you recruiting? What is the kind of business that's involved in the area? So of course, in the Buona Vista area is all the R&D, NUS type, and then At the east side, of course, you have the Changi Business Park, the SUTD. So those are like the different growth clusters. Of course, those in the middle area, like Serangoon, Clementi area, even to a certain extent, Holland Village area, they serve multiple regions. Some they serve the NUS region, they also serve the CBD regions. So one of the key things is besides focusing on specific clusters, also think about how many clusters does this area serve. Now, I also agree with what Win was talking about in the CBD. The problem is CBD, the prices are very high due to its central location. So its yield generally is less attractive. And most of the people that buy in the prime districts is really not because of rental yield. If you want, especially those buying like good class bungalows, they are not into yield because the yield is very, very low because of the high price. So that is the thing about assets in the CBD area. It's more for capital play, and then you are looking into more of like, you have like maybe 20 million cash available, and then you want to preserve that cash, you want to preserve that value, then yes, then you buy an asset in the CBD to preserve it. Not treating it like a bond, but more like a kind of fixed asset, where the value will retain over the years.
Right. So you could invest for stability of rentals, looking at areas near the MRT or near professions which are very resilient in times of crisis. Or you could look at the longer term capital gain. And for those who are looking at the longer term capital gain, then of course, properties in the CCR are now very accessible in terms of pricing, and they should actually explore in the CCR. I'm going to just let the webinar know we are extending this by 15 minutes so that we can try our best to answer as many questions as possible. The three of us here as panelists, we just got warmed up, and we are still having a lot of adrenaline pumped in. So we're going to go for another 15 to 20 minutes. Let's see how it goes, all right? Yeah. And the next question would be this. Actually, is still on buying for rent, and we continue that theme. It seems to be quite a number of questions of that. With increasing work from home in the future, are we expecting uptake increase of larger units, both for buying and renting? I suppose when we started working from home, for some of us, like for me, since 20th of March, space suddenly became crucial, right? Yeah, because the space that I used to sleep at becomes a workplace as well. And then, you have everybody working from home. There will be a crunch on that space. So that question could have arisen from that. Is if this is going to be a new normal, for example, into the future, then would the larger units be more favorable? Guys, over to you.
Yeah, maybe I start first on this. I totally agree that we may see a shift because if you look at, especially now with work from home and then also the home-based learning, I was joking with some friends, if you want to find a quiet corner, the only place is the restroom. How the space is being designed, I won't say the amount of space, but how the space is being designed, how efficient is the space being used is going to be very critical. Like if you look at even like some of the studio apartments, if they can design such that they can carve out, some work areas, like one big study area for people to do work from home, and then the other one is for sleeping. Those kind of arrangements may work. But of course, immediately people will start thinking about these 2-bedroom units for single suddenly seems more palatable instead of 1-bedroom units. Those with family, of course, they'll try to have more bedrooms so that the children won't find them. So those are the things that I think it will change. It will definitely change. But we should not forget that because of ABSD, actually what happened is that the demand shift was towards smaller units because of its affordability. affordable quantum. So will this change it back? Utility-wise, in terms from the demand function, they definitely will shift towards a bigger unit. But affordability-wise, they may still be very constrained, and that may lead them going back to the smaller units.
Win?
I would like to tackle this question about will there be a pivot to bigger units after this COVID-19 lockdown experience. I'll tackle this question from two market segments, two perspectives. The first perspective is I agree with Nigel. The biggest impediment to the pivot to bigger units is TDSR, total debt servicing ratio. We all know that now developers, when they have their new launch, because of the land price that they have entered the market, there's a certain PSF that they need to sell in order to break even and even to make that small little marginal profit margin that they can do. And with that, the PSF is already quite high. So as a result, what you see is that most of the new launch today, you compare the one bidder to the launches 10 years back, two bidders with the launches 10 years back, three bidders with the launches 10 years back. Basically, the sizes have shrunk. And the reason why they have shrunk is because there's a certain limit elasticity to how much an average Singapore buyers can afford. It's not that he don't want, but because based on TDSR, he simply doesn't have the kind of income level to buy a 2,000 or 3,000 square feet unit based on, let's say, 2,000 PSF, for example, unless they belong to the top echelon of the Singapore population. So because of this TDSR, I think ideally, yes, people would like to go for bigger home, but no, but they are hampered. We all know that for new launch prices above a certain price point, there will always be a very strong resistance because of the curve, loan curve of TDSR. People simply cannot borrow too much, especially with second property, they can only do 45%, that's even worse. Yeah, so that is one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is then for buyers whereby space is more desirable than new or nice facility, where space is the primary concern. Then I think the only option available for them, if they want to have a reasonably priced big home, will have to be going for the secondary market, going for the older apartment. So I think my answer is no and yes. No, if for the primary market is tough. Yes, if they go for the secondary market, still possible to find some old homes, big enough, but the PSF is lower because they're old.
Right. I think other than affordability considerations, it will also mean how working from home becomes a concept that evolves beyond COVID-19. And if working from home is a concept that develops beyond just a pandemic, then the question would be, what do we need? Because what it means is we have mobility at the workplace. We don't have to just go to the office for our office requirements and needs and for our meetings. We can actually work in any spot that has a hotspot, for example. So in my view, maybe Wi-Fi is a more important factor to consider. And if the development or more places are having hotspots and the development is entirely wireless, right? Then you could actually pick anywhere for you to commute, or rather for you to communicate at work. Yeah.
Another point I would like to add on to what Tee Khoon say is with this work from home concept, I think it could also result in another trend whereby instead of a big family stay together where we have father, mother, brother, sister, and then the children and all that, because it's tough to work from home when there's so many people crowded into one 4-room flat, for example. I just read some case study today. So what some of the adults may choose to do is they choose to buy another new property out. This could still be a one bidder, but in that one, he has his own full privacy. He doesn't need to stay with his brother, sister, brother's children, and also parents. So he has his own privacy, so nobody disturb him when he works from home. So that could also be another interesting trend happen where you will see smaller household living in a single unit. This is one way to overcome the affordability issue.
Right.
Satisfy the work from home privacy issue.
Okay, so we got to move on from here. I just want to pick on a subject that actually was a subset of our earlier questions, and that is resale market or new launch. If I am to buy my choice home, whether I should look for it in the secondary market or I should pay a visit to the show gallery. I suppose now it will be more virtual show gallery for the time being. Which one would be our pick? I mean, I suppose it depends on whether locations that we are preferring would have those new launches, right? So if, let's say, I want to put my son or my daughter, when he or she comes to primary school age in a school of my choice, then it depends on whether there is a new launch available to time with my purchase and my son's or daughter's education, or there's simply only secondary market deals available near that school location.
Yeah, I think when we think about these locations, right, there's these two parts. One is the use, whether should you be, are you buying for your own use, or are you buying for investment, or are you buying for own use and investment? Now, if you are driven by this own use motivation, you have several location considerations like proximity to parents, proximity to certain schools, proximity to certain business clusters because one of the spouse work there. So, well, because of all these considerations taken into account, usually they are not driven by new launches. So obviously, they will hope to have new launches because it's new. Everything is brand new. There will be, it smells new. So things are more, new in the sense. So people tend to go for those kind of things. But if there's nothing there, there's nothing that they can choose. The other thing is that should one actually look at resale? Again, I think this is a question that this is one of the answers I probably use Win's answer, which is that it depends on the space you want. Some people want a larger space, but are constrained by certain affordability issues. So they will have to go into the secondary market, buy an older unit, or buy an older unit with a shorter lease, because that's what they can afford, and to enjoy that space. So there's a lot of reasons along there. I would say that there's one model that fits all. Again, it's also very personal reason. Now, if you're buying for investment, that is the tricky part. Because one will always think that, okay, the resale prices are lower, so if I buy it, I can sell higher or closer to the new sale price. But one thing that people usually forget is the cost of depreciation. Even though the property that you bought is cheaper, but there's a form of physical depreciation. It could be in terms of the leaves, in terms of the walls, in terms of the facade. So these are the things that actually impact on the value of the property. Depreciation thing and how it impact on the value and how it impact on the rents. Because when you also want to rent it out, people will also compare. If we have one apple for apple comparison, you generally will choose the newer one to rent if the rents are the same. Yeah,
I suppose the new launches, you have a progressive payment scheme that helps to ease cash flow as well, and
right.
you could always save bonuses for the contribution to the payment scheme. And at the end of the day, when the project TOP, when the temporary occupation permit is obtained, there is a defects liability period of 12 months, right? And being new, you find that repair or maintenance expenses for the next 12 months, depending on defects that are found in the unit, would be serviced by the developer. So that's another plus, right? As compared to if you are buying a resale unit and you are buying for investment, you have rental income immediately, isn't it? You don't have to wait 3 years or less for the developer to build. Yeah. Win, any view before we go on to the next question?
Yes,
Time is really racing against us.
Yes. So we're going to talk very fast, bro. So a couple of points to add on to what Nigel have mentioned. I think I will choose to frame this as also some pros and cons or upside and downside going for new versus resale. I think for the group of buyers who like to buy resale is they believe that for resale, the property is already there. They can go for a viewing, they can touch, see, feel. They can see the view, they can see the ambience, they can see the environment. So everything, what you see is what you get. So the evaluation is more thorough. Whereas for new, they are buying off the plan. They really don't know exactly how it will play out, how the view will be, how the layout, everything will be. Having said that, I think now technology has made it possible for people to visualize how the new unit will look like, and also how the view will look like from external. PropertyGuru have the tools to do that through our Fast Key tool, which allow agents to show some of these visualization to buyers. So I think some of these issues can be resolved using technology. Other than that, the other part I want to highlight the difference between new versus resale is also, I think it also has to do with the temperament of the buyer. I will classify broadly this into whether is he a very patient person or not a very patient person. So why I say that is because my experience of observing the property market in these few years is that generally speaking, the appreciation of resale property is much muted compared to new. Because new, they are boosted by GLS, by en bloc and all that. So the launch price, and then when you have this pre-launch, then people buy, the early buyers will always get some upside when the later buyers catch up. Because in new, the developer control the whole price. Whereas for resale, you are competing with 280 others individual owner. So somebody can call up a lower price and then you can't really sell at that price you want to. So for those where I think if their investment horizon is probably in the range of 5 years or so, I think new would probably suit them better. But for those who are to wait, where their investment horizon is 10 years and above, resale has what I call the jackpot, where we call the Singapore dream, which is an block story. So for those who can hit the jackpot, the returns can be quite significant. The last deal I did was I was getting 300% capital appreciation. But the qualifier is you need to have the patience to wait for 10 years for that to happen. But very often than not, most of the people will exit out even before 5 or 6 years already. So that's why I think it also depends on the personal temperament of the investor, whether he has the patience to wait out for resale property to capture the best value capture for the resale. If not, then I think new would be better for him. Yeah.
Okay, let's take last two questions together. This whole evening I've been grouping questions together so that we kill a few birds with one stone. How are property sales working with the circuit breaker on? Should I wait with the purchase or sale of my property? Now, I just kick it off, right? There is actually no restriction to selling during the extended circuit breaker period, though there would be no physical viewings and interactions between sellers, agents, and prospective buyers. So sellers of resale properties who are tech savvy, for example, can do so, or they can do so through agents whom they appoint to sell their properties, who have filmed videos or virtual tours on their properties already. So viewings can be conducted online or through virtual tours or videos already filmed before the circuit breaker period. Any negotiations can also take place via a Zoom call or an exchange of emails, for example. And the option to purchase can still be signed and exchanged with option fee check through courier services. Lawyers are still available when options are exercised, and the option exercise date can also be scheduled to, say, after 1st June 2020 if you want to play it safe, when the extended circuit breaker period is lifted. But for me, main consideration for the sellers would be whether they are able to obtain their expected selling price, or they have to give a discount, and how steep that discount should be to have a sale done. Most sellers are likely to wait out this period before putting their properties for sale to ride a so-called pent-up demand than to sell short of their expected prices right now. So that's a possibility. And for buyers, they are always hunting for a good deal, whether during the pandemic or otherwise. And there will be motivated sellers who will wish to relinquish their properties in the shortest possible time. And prospective buyers can now look at procuring their ideal homes regardless of the pandemic. Like I said, they could view sales galleries on digital platforms with no physical contact. And they are able to choose, if you are looking at new launch, they are able to choose from 40 new developments in the pipeline, of which 50% of that would be in the core central region, good for capital gain as an investment, and likely at more accessible prices than 2019. And with the silver lining of soft interest rates, prospective buyers going house hunting seems set to land on good deals. So that's an opinion from me. The rest of the panelists?
Yeah, I think the key challenge now is really the difficulty in going for a viewing, whether you can touch and feel how the project is, and a lot of people feel more comfortable, especially to see whether there are ceiling leakage or whatnot, especially in the secondary market. But on the other flip side is that sometimes you don't have a choice. You just want to stay in that area. Like me, when I was searching my flat through PropertyGuru, I went through the list. There are only so many, because if I want like a executive unit in this particular street, that's only because the way we constrain our options. So sometimes we only have that few number of units, and if you already have that option of you're going to hack everything, change, do major renovation, then I think that maybe it's still okay to go ahead, because even though you are not there physically, but you can make all the adjustments that you need. The only thing, of course, for those that are sensitive to sounds, right? You may not have the feel, because sometimes you may think that there's no noise, everything, but then after you move in, then you realize that there's some noises there and there. But even then, even with physical visits, sometimes you may not even hear it also. So I think that's the key thing. What is the need of the home at this point in time? Some people probably need a house as soon as possible, because otherwise they may go mad. So I would say that yes, then go for it. And for those that are selling, sometimes it's because of demographic reasons, like divorce. They really cannot stand each other. The husband really cannot stand the side of the wife, and vice versa. So they are have to force to sell. So there are, I will still think there will be some transactions going on, but it's just that it's against the norm of how we transact a real estate. So I think it's going to be difficult, but for those that really need, I think it will still go on.
Win, a final point from you, and then we'll wrap up the webinar for tonight.
So
some parents need to put their kids to bed.
That's right. So I will tackle this from two perspectives, selling and buying. So from selling perspective, I'm putting two on my properties out for sale. I think it's still possible to sell during COVID-19. And my observation is it depends on who are your target customer. I think during this outbreak, it might be easier to have an investor coming in interested in your property compared to an owner-occupier. because for investor, his calculation and his evaluation is very different. He doesn't really need to know so much of the bill or whatever environment. All he needs is to calculate whether the numbers make sense to him. So, but I think we have to accept that during COVID-19, the number of leads you get will be lower. So if you are selling, you have to temper your expectation that if you want to hold on to a price, then you have to temper expectation instead of a timeline. You probably need to project a longer timeline to sell your property, maybe 2 times, 3 times longer than under normal situation. But if you want to sell it fast, then you have to temper your expectation in terms of the pricing, because you basically have a smaller pool of customer coming to see or interested in your property. So that's for the selling side. On the buying side, I will tackle it from two sub perspective. One is whether you are buying from a developer or you are buying from individual homeowner. If you are buying from a developer, then what I have to share with the audience is do not have an illusion that you can get what, like what I mentioned earlier, global financial crisis, what 20%, 25%. That's not going to happen because today our developer is working on very, very thin margin already. It's razor thin margin. So they won't be able to give anything that is double-digit percent discount to you. So do not have any illusion that you will get it from the developer. And most likely, most of the developer in Singapore, they have very strong balance sheet, very good cash position. They also wouldn't want to sell at a loss to their customer. So I think if you can get some small little discount from them, it's quite good already. But nevertheless, it's still a discount. If you are buying from an individual homeowner, I think there is an opportunity for you to do some bottom fishing, especially for a distressed seller whose job or business could be affected by COVID-19. Because what I read from the data is certain non-essential services, like people in the retail industry, people in the F&B industry, people in the travel industry, where their job, their regular income or their business income could be very much affected. There may be some of them who may choose to downsize their home or things like that, or cash out their home. I think Nigel mentioned a classic case, which is the oil trading company boss cashing out his class bungalow. So these are some of the opportunities because most of these individuals, unlike developer, they don't have that kind of holding power. But for such cases, I also think that it will not drop like what we saw back in global financial crisis, 25%, that kind. I tried to do some bottom fishing based on that. It won't work because by and large, as I shared earlier, due to TDSR, ABSD, and SSD, these 3 major cooling measures, most of the homeowner or property owner today, they are in a pretty healthy balance sheet. So even they could be in some form of financial distress whereby they might have lost their job or they might have lost their business income. But the kind of loan installment that they need to service, usually they do have some buffer or savings in their household to weather it. So it's not like die, they have to sell to you at that kind of price. So what I want to say is for those who are buying, I need to temper your expectation also. Don't expect steep discount. If you can get a good single-digit discount, it's really quite good talking about this crisis. Yeah, back to you, Tee Khoon.
Thank you. I'm going to share the slide right now so that you can also capture, for those of you who want access to our PropertyGuru Property Market Index second quarter 2020 report, you can use this link, or if you have your mobile phones in front of you, you just scan the QR code there. All right, so we have come to the end of the webinar. I hope the session has benefited you and that there are vital takeaways from this webinar for you to mull over your property sale or purchase decision. Thank you for all your questions. We will endeavor to respond to as many as possible after this as well. Also, keep an eye out for the recording of this webinar on our website and social media channels. Thank you for your participation and stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.